안녕하십니까.
Good afternoon. My name is Kang Mo-sung. I am from the Jeju Self-Governing Province Office. We are going to begin the session now. Our session is about the coexistence model for nature and humans to overcome climate and ecological crisis, focusing on Jeju's eco-legal person. First and foremost, we are going to invite chairperson of the Agricultural, Fishery and Livestock Economic Committee, and he's going to deliver a speech of congratulations.
Good afternoon. As introduced, I am President Kang Yeon-ho of Agriculture, Livestock Economy Committee of Jeju Council. Thank you for coming. It is beautiful fall despite COVID-19, heat waves, and typhoon. It would be very good if we can have this rich fall every year, but we cannot guarantee sustainability. Climate crises, ecological crises have tremendously affected our lives. That is COVID-19, which has been 3 years. In order to overcome this unfortunate reality, we are here to gather wisdom and set up strategies at this Jeju Forum. And it is a very timely session because we have the theme Coexistence Model of Nature and Humans to Overcome Climate and Ecological Crises. I want to express my sincere gratitude to our Professor Park Kyu-hwan, who is our moderator, and keynote speaker Professor Klaus Posselman, Professor Jin Hee-jong, and many panelists as well. Contagious diseases that caused by ecological crises, and a lot of disasters should be prevented by finding ways to coexist with the nature. And what is the most important thing is to start from small things, and I believe this session is the very first step. It is said that people who travel 1,000 kilometers and who travel 100 kilometers have different mindsets, and the way to pack their belongings are also different. I want you to have the mindset of traveling, of the person who travel 1,000 kilometers to explore ways forward. Best wishes for the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, the chairperson Kang. Let me introduce the moderator or chairperson of the session, Professor of Yangsan-daegyo, Professor Bach. In Germany, he studied law and got doctor's degree there. And then he was a researcher of the Supreme Court, and he was a free university professor in Germany too. And I'm going to hand over the microphone to the Professor Bach so that he can preside the session. Thank you. Thank you very much. My name is Park Kyu-hwan from Yongsan University. As you know, our topic is the humans' response to the climate change and the ecological concept. Actually, Professor Jin studied the concept of eco-legal person, and we are going to talk about the topic today. Let me introduce all the panelists and speakers for today's session. Klaus Posselman from the Auckland University. He's going to join us online, but sorry that we have some technical issue. So once we are connected, he's going to begin his presentation. So let me introduce Klaus Posselman first. As for the ecological crisis, he was a pioneer. As a scholar, he was in Germany for long. Now he is in New Zealand. I believe that we have a lot to learn from him. He is a environmental legal expert, and he has studied ecological issues. And second, the concept of eco-legal person, not only at home but also abroad, it was suggested by Dr. or Professor Jin, and he is into the ecological issues, and he's very passionate in leading all the gatherings on ecological issues. And he would try to designate the legal persons starting from Jeju. And we have a discussant, Dr. Jang Soo-jin, and sitting just in front of us from the Marine Animal Research and Conservation. And then from the Animals Rights Subcommittee, we have Kim Do-hee. He's sitting in front of us. And journalist Nam from the Hangyeol newspaper will join us as a panelist. And Professor Bach from Gangwon National University will join us as a panelist as well. So let's begin the session without further ado. First presentation will be made by Professor Jin first, followed by Professor Bosselman. He is online connected, but he will make a presentation after Professor Jin. Let's hand over the microphone to Professor Jin.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Jin Hee-jong. So my presentation is about significance and effects of eco-legal person. I'm honored to be here, and I want to send my gratitude to our panelists. Then let me start my presentation. Today, humanity is facing climate crisis, which is threatening humanity's sustainability. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said that the current climate crisis should be addressed by the humanity, and we have only 10 years. This is a red quote. Not only the climate crisis, we also see many other environmental issues, and humanity has also recognized this issue. The problem is that if the current generation takes no practical action to overcome, the next generation will be faced with a disaster that is difficult to bear. The root cause of the crisis is humanity's long-standing human-centric view toward nature. In order to overcome the climate and ecological crises, human attitudes toward nature should fundamentally change. Nature should not be treated only as a means to satisfy human desires. We need to move from human-centric approach to an approach where human beings can coexist with nature. Over the last 300 years, during the process of industrial revolution, we have used nature only for our profit, and that the ecological crisis facing us today is the result of that history. And we need to change the human-centric approach. That is what many experts emphasize. 2 years ago, I suggested to introduce eco-legal person to overcome the crisis. It designates certain non-human environmental entities the status of a legal person. the status gives them legal capacity to protect their internal value. The legal person system is originally for human beings, but now we can expand the scope to nature. Legal persons can help them protect their own value and respect ecological rights of future generations. Many thinkers and political leaders advocate for the coexistence of humans and nature, but it is hard to realize the idea in humans' daily life. And eco-legal person system can act as a practical medium to connect humans' daily life and coexistence between humanity and nature. The modern society introduced a legal person system that legally grants personalities to entities or non-human objects for the smooth functioning of human society, which is a really good, great system. The concept has become diverse and broader with social progress and needs. Therefore, companies and schools, they have become legal persons, and we can extend that scope to environmental entities, animals and plants. Eco-legal person system add environmental entities to the system to give them legal rights. It aims to expand rights of the nature within the current legal system, but it's not an easy job because we have our practices, we have the traditional legal system, and this new approach can change the traditional system. That is why introducing the new one is something very hard to achieve. It is not realistic to say that all animals and natural beings should have immediate rights. That is why we need the eco-legal person system as a medium. One of the entities that are under consideration is bottlenose dolphins. Dolphins are at the top of the ecosystem as a final predator, which plays an important role in maintaining balance of the ecosystem. In particular, dolphins are important in containing or slowing down climate crisis. Bottlenose dolphins are in serious danger of survival due to marine pollution and reckless development. And it can work as an index that can show the healthiness of Jeju Island and the nation as a whole. The situation that they have a difficult situation to survive shows that our ecosystem is at risk. Bottlenose dolphins are in serious danger of survival due to marine pollution, reckless development, and the overcrowding of the marine tourism industry. Bottlenose dolphins are categorized as near threatened on the red list of IUCN. They can go extinct without protection. If they are given the eco-legal person status, they will be able to protect their rights to support their life. But they cannot exercise their rights by themselves, even if they are designated as a legal person. We need to establish a system to represent them. What we need right now is to establish a ecological court to take care of eco-legal persons, their rights, the types of rights, their responsibility. And we need to understand that this cannot be done with the traditional legal system, so we need ecological experts. Ultimately, we need to make sure their rights are included in the Constitution. The system should also be expanded to ecologically significant entities, animals or plants, in and outside Korea. Rather than selecting certain species, we need to establish a platform to encompass the entire rights for the nature. With more and more eco-legal persons being designated, eco-friendly approach and attitude will grow further. I hope the system spreads further across the world. Today, on this Jeju Island, we have more than 10 million visitors and travelers. If Jeju adopts the system, then travelers and residents might be able to understand why we gave the legal person status to bottlenose dolphins. That means they will get the idea of how important it is to protect those species. That way, and considering that Jeju is an important ecological island, we need to show them the Jeju Island is working really hard to respond to climate change and ecological crises. We need to change our attitude toward nature to overcome the ecological crises. And recent data, and Jeju Island has announced its vision to coexist with nature. That means we need to change our attitude toward nature, and this cannot be done overnight. And I believe introducing eco-legal person system can become a very good first step. And Korea, that way we can find a new breakthrough for our future.
Thank you very much, Professor Jin. Very progressive idea has been presented. There are some legal terms used that you might find it difficult to understand. So let me explain some of the terms and glossary. The research has been done actively in Germany. So to put it simply, or simply put, in Germany, the air can be given a legal entity too. What about the air? You may wonder how come we can kind of designate air as a legal entity. We are suffering from the yellow dust, and if we have a legal entity or give a legal entity to the yellow dust, then we can put it in the court, or we can sue the source of the pollution. It shows how important it is. It will be a starting point. Now let me invite Professor Klaus Bosselmann as our pioneer. He has done a lot of research. I believe that he is connected online. So Dr. Bosselmann, would you begin your presentation?
I start with an apology. I would have liked to be with you in person. Unfortunately, there were difficulties to receive a visa from the Korean authority. So at short notice, I had to change my plans, travel plans. I could not come over to you where I would have very much liked to be, but rather I'm just arriving from a flight from Los Angeles here in Auckland. So with that apology, and also with special thanks to the organizers and to Jin Heng Jong for preparing my visit. I heard with great interest what Jin Hin Jong just talked about. I fully agree with everything that has been said, and I would like to briefly cover 3 developments in 3 different areas. Germany has been mentioned, and secondly, my country here, New Zealand, also knows the concept of eco-legal persons or rights of nature. These 2 terms are used simultaneously. And thirdly, I will talk briefly about a very exciting international development at the United Nations. What these 3 examples have in common, they are efforts to shift our traditional anthropocentric or human-centered concept of the relationship between humans and nature to a non-anthropocentric or ecocentric concept. And I find it very appropriate that bottlenose dolphins in Jeju Island should be chosen as symbolizing this shift or in helping to initiate this shift in thinking. We have done the same in Germany back in 1987 when we were suing the German government for violation of fundamental rights of animals. And what we have done, together with Christopher Stone, the late founder of the concept of rights of nature from the United States, who sadly passed away 2 years ago, Christopher Stone and the colleagues and myself, we presented a seal, a sea lion, but it's smaller than a sea lion, a seal from the North Sea, presented in the court of in Hamburg, arguing that the pollution of the North Sea has caused a large-scale loss of lives of these seals, which was a scientific fact, caused through toxic developments that had their origins in the chemical industry in Germany. And we argued that environmental protection does nothing for protecting the natural environment, in particular affected seals in this instance. Now, the court requested, of course, a legal standing of the seal and concluded that seals or animals at large have no legal standing, they have no legal entity, no legal personhood, and the case was dismissed, which was precisely what we wanted to achieve. We therefore were able to demonstrate that there is a need for recognizing rights of nature. And this debate has been going on for decades now in Germany, and quite recently there have been interesting developments. I will just briefly mention one initiative in Bavaria. I was participating in this project just 2 weeks ago in southern Germany, where we symbolically declared a river, the river Loisach, south of Munich, to have legal personhood. So we as a group of committed individuals, and we want to sue on behalf and in the name of the river, various industrial enterprises and farmers who consistently overpollute this river. So this is also, of course, an example or a symbol for the move towards a non-anthropocentric concept of law and to give nature voice and legal weight. We also have recently, a few months ago, initiated a national campaign to change the German constitution to incorporate the concept of eco-legal personhood. And this is, of course, a development that will take many years, but for the time being, we have been very successful with support of hundreds of organizations and a lot of media attention. So this is under the heading We call it ecologicalization of the legal system, right? Ecology, obviously, is the science about the connections between the various aspects of natural systems, including human beings. This is, of course, the important point to make, and we would like to see this formalized in the German constitution. We are hopeful it can be done in due course, and not just in Germany, hopefully, but also in other European countries or countries around the world. In New Zealand, we have not a written constitution, but we have laws in place that have, for the first time in any Western country, recognized legal personhood of natural subjects. In particular, I think it's well known also among colleagues here participating in this wonderful panel that the Whanganui River, the largest river in North Island of New Zealand, has been granted legal personhood thanks to an agreement between the indigenous Maori people and the New Zealand government in 2017. In practice, this means that the river and all the related tributing rivers and ecosystems constitute a legal person in a sense that this ecosystem has the right to function according to its own needs and to natural processes. We do not have as yet a legal case. This has simply not eventuated. It is predicted that a major legal case will come with a take of water from the river in a plan for next year. This would be an opportunity then to test the concept of legal personhood in the Court of Justice. But the concept is there. It is, of course, worldwide acknowledged that New Zealand has, as the first country from the Western world, but including all developed countries, acknowledge the rights of nature. And there are, of course, examples from other countries in Latin America and so forth, but I will not have the time to go any further. But what I would like you to be aware of is a current initiative at the United Nations level. There are, of course, ongoing attempts to reform the United Nations system. And one very powerful movement that started in the 1990s has called for the United Nations Trusteeship Council to be converted as a Environmental Trusteeship Council or Earth Trusteeship Council. These are efforts that go back to Kofi Annan, the former Secretary General of the United Nations, who has suggested that. In other words, states and the United Nations need to have a fundamental legal obligation to protect the natural environment and Earth as a whole. This is under international law currently not the case. States are free to protect or pollute the environment, but there is no legal obligation to do so other than, of course, voluntary laws that each country may have, or international conventions, climate change and so on, but not as a fundamental obligation associated with the state. There is no duty to protect the environment. And this is, of course, a massive flaw in the system. And the Trusteeship Council that the United Nations could establish to replace the older Trusteeship Council that had a very different function would then ensure that states not only take obligations towards the environment and to the earth as a whole more seriously, but arguably they would also have legal obligations to protect the Earth for the Earth's own sake. This is the same ethical concept that we previously identified as a non-anthropocentric concept. So in other words, we need to come to a development where each of us individually, societies and states as a whole and at the United Nations level, protect the natural environment simply because it's there. It has intrinsic value and not just an instrumental or utilitarian value for humans. Now, this will be a long way to achieve this, but at the moment there is the interesting development towards the Summit for the Future that takes place, excuse me, in September 2024. I'm an advisor to the Secretary General and have just recently proposed that there should be various measures being taken in order to have a statement at the Future Summit in September 24, calling for a repurposing of the Trusteeship Council in order to function as an Earth Trusteeship Council. There are other initiatives that I'm also supportive of, and they have also suggested, and that includes a special envoy in the United Nations Office for Future Generations, and the terms of references for such an envoy and United Nations Office for Future Generations would be to provide for a healthy natural environment as a precondition for any rights that future generations may have. So what I'm saying here is that even at United Nations level or international level, there are initiatives of this nature. And of course, there are many, many networks that campaign for eco-legal persons. I mentioned just a few. There is the very influential Australian Rights of Nature organization, or the Australian Ecological Law Association, AELA. There is a global organization that I'm chairing. This is the Ecological Law and Governance Association, with many hundreds of members and organizations being membership. There are many other organizations. I don't have the time to name them here. I will conclude by saying that Korea has been in many ways at the forefront of these developments towards eco-legal persons. I will just mention the wonderful group People for Earth. And I remember with great fondness in 2019, we had a conference in Seoul on Earth trusteeship and on the possibility that both South Korea and North Korea should take equal responsibility to protect the demilitarized zone between them as a peace zone and as a zone that requires protection for its own sake. This is an example of a non-anthropocentric trusteeship concept that we discussed at the conference. And I'm hopeful that we can make further progress in years to come through working groups and further contacts. So I want to congratulate those individuals and groups on Jeju Island to promote the bottlenecked dolphin as an important first step towards the concept of eco-legal personhood. It could be highly symbolic, not only because the bottleneck dolphin is so precious, but because of this sort of symbolic character, it could have a triggering function in Korea. And together, when we think of a number of countries, and some of them I've mentioned, we can see a slow but hopefully steady progress towards a legal system that eventually will be able to protect the natural environment, including animals, for their own sake because of their intrinsic value. That seems to be absolutely critical to do. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you, and I wish your panel well, and I'm keen to follow this further proceedings. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Bosselman. Thank you. I can say that you're a scholar and also a campaign leader. In summary, there are two movements. First, the legal person, and second, trusteeship. You talked about the trusteeship. Two, I believe that they are very important pathways that we should take. And the envoy of the UN for the future generation, we have to dispatch. Actually, last year in Germany, the climate law was found to be against the fundamental right. That was the ruling that we got in Germany. It says that it was against the future generations. So I believe that this is an area that we should study about because they are all interconnected. Thank you so much for making a wonderful presentation. Now let's move on to the discussions. Thank you for your wonderful presentation once again. And let me invite the first discussant, Dr. Zhang. Let me pass over the microphone to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Jang Soo-jin, Director of Marine and Animal Research and Conservation. I want to talk especially about the status of bottlenose dolphins and challenges facing the species, and to talk about if it is feasible to give the species a eco-legal person status. In Korea, Jeju Island is the only habitat of the species. It is a highly social species, and Jeju Island has about 120 of them. According to our research, the dolphins are especially their main habitat is the eastern side of the island. They move around the island, and during the day, they spend more than 90% of their time while traveling and also foraging. So about 90% for foraging and traveling. So we have done research on the species, and every year we found them got injured and dead because of ocean waste. And since 2015, ship tour started, and those those vessels have disrupted dolphins traveling, injuring them a lot, which raised a lot of people's concerns. When the distance is less than 300 meters, then that would affect their behavior for foraging. And arguably, you can see those the species being hurt. We can say that it is not a natural injury. It might be because of the vessels So it is not appropriate to have those vessels to approach very close to the dolphins. And noise from the vessels are also affecting dolphins. Noise from the ships have disrupted the communication between the species. This is the result of a study that we have found. All the seas around Jeju Island is their habitat, and you can see this part marked in blue, and this is where we have the wind power plant, which is also their habitat. Wind power plant requires environment impact assessment, and the assessment study shows that they didn't found the dolphins around this coast, but we did our own research and we could see for more than 40 days during the summer, during the day and at night, we found the dolphins around this area. That shows the reality that we don't really know the status of the dolphins, and the lack of study has led to a lot of errors in our policy, and we need institutional support and social consensus to protect the species. That is why it is very feasible to have the species as the first ever eco-legal person in Korea. And that way we can protect the species, not only the species but also the nature, overall nature environment of Jeju Island. Thank you. That's all from my side.
예, 감사합니다.
Thank you very much. As for the Director Jung, she has been searching the dolphins for long, and she talks about the issue on TV as well. She talked about the scientific approach. Very good. You presented a very objective scientific data, which was good. So let's move on to the second discussant before we have a overall Q&A session or discussion. Let me invite lawyer Kim Do-hee. Would you please make your comment? Thank you. I am from the Animal Rights Protection Association. It has not been organized that long, but still we have an animal rights subcommittee organized, and I'm working for that. Thank you for your efforts, and I'm happy to see what you are doing. I read your book, and it inspired me. And Klaus Bosselmann, I am very happy to see you today, and I'd like to thank the organizer for organizing this event. And Animal Rights Subcommittee consists of all the lawyers who work for the animal rights. So we try to publicize the issues around the dolphins which are trained for the shows for Korea. They are locked in some facilities and mobilized to do some show, and they were very good source of the income. And we learned what other countries are doing. And as for the dolphins, they are kidnapped from the sea and also go through the abuse process and also hard labor is what they have to do for years before they die. But there was no way for them to sue the people who abducted them. The main reason was that they were not given a legal entity. So we insisted on allowing or giving the legal entity to the dolphins and animal rights organization, we also sued those people who run the shows, mobilizing dolphins. But we do not know whether it was a best approach that should have taken. And as for the animal rights, Argentina, India, Colombia, and as for the animals, they recognize the legal entity of the non-human animals. And the topic of allowing the legal entity to the nature and allowing them to exercise their legal right by designating their representative a lawyer is a big step forward. The eco issues are intensifying and getting serious, and then they need an expert assistance, which means that our legal system will find it difficult to accept the new concept. So to solve that, we need to give or allow the legal entity status to the natures and the ingredients of the nature, which is a good direction. So now we have to go beyond that. How can we conserve their rights, and how can we better designate representative for them? How can we refine the legal systems for them? This is the discussion that we should have. So as a helper or aider, or those people who support the nature, we may support them in the background as a guardian. So we may function like a guardian, which is rather passive, or we may be more active. So those people who provide assistance to the nature, then we may include them as the eco-legal entity. In New Zealand, the river was given a legal entity, and the Maori Aboriginals and the government officials was designated as a co-guardian, which is good. As for the guardian is required because the nature does not have the competency to represent themselves. And as for the eco-legal person, let's move on to another topic about the eco-legal person. Sorry that I'm behind the schedule, so sorry to talk too fast. As for the eco-legal system, should it be non-human animals or nature? No, humans are part of the nature too. And as for the eco-legal persons, I believe that we should be able to give the right for them to protect themselves without designating guardian. That's the ultimate direction we should go. Thank you. This concludes my remark. Thank you so much. Thank you, Lawyer Kim. The current legal system will find it difficult to encompass everything all the things that's going on. And I believe that many scholars agree to what you said. The legal system has changed, and big change takes place every 100 years. Starting in 2000, the key changes are taking place in ecosystem. I believe that Dr. Boserman agreed to that. And we have a new constitutional laws being shaped. And then the current legal system will find it difficult to follow up, which means we have to reform the legal system. You may have seen the rulings delivered by the court and Supreme Court, and our perspective will become different. We will consider the nature as our co-partner. We will not consider humans as a ruler of the nature. In order for us to survive, we should have that kind of perspective. Let's move on to the next discussant.
안녕하십니까. 저는 한
Good afternoon. I am Nam Jong-young, a writer of 한겨레 신문 newspaper. I'm not an expert, but I am invited. That might be because I did a mirror test with orangutan in Seoul University Park to tell people animals have their own mindset. And I think that is why I am invited. I believe there are two different trends for eco-legal person concept. First of all, it is based on animal ethology, based on animals' rights. So reflecting the scientific achievements such as animal ethology, it is a logic of giving legal rights to animals whose self-consciousness and spiritual world have been discovered. For example, NHRP said that animals are also legal entities with freedom of the body and not bound, filing a lawsuit, and filed a habeas corpus saying that animals have the right not to be kidnapped. And chimpanzees and elephants were included, but there are some critics. And they say that they are actually separating animals into different categories. This is another human-centric approach because they are just categorizing animals based on their own standard. Animals have different level of awareness. So the critics say it is another human-centric approach. The second trend for eco-legal person is based on deep ecology. Thomas Berry's theory of earth jurisprudence is a good example. He believes that law and governance should ensure that the well-being of all members of the earth and it should be protected. A typical example is that New Zealand granted legal personality to Hawanui River, and the Maori tribe. We should understand that the law is based on Maori tribe, and their culture believes that mountain, river are the relatives of human beings. So the law in New Zealand consider this special situation, so we need to understand this special situation. And I believe that in order to activate this discussion, we need to make sure bottlenose dolphins are great symbols of ecological system of Jeju Island. And I want to say that to this end, I propose a method for the bottlenose dolphin to firmly establish itself in the culture. From the three perspectives: conservation, observation, tourism, and research. Recently, a famous Korean series also showed the beautiful feature of dolphins, and we can designate protection area for them, or we can designate them as natural monument. And secondly, regarding tourism, this can be a great opportunity for us to tell people they should be protected. We see a lot of travelers in Daejeon Coast Road, and they visit there to see the dolphins. Despite growing travelers, no training is provided for them about the importance of protecting the species. WDC, which is an association of dolphins, has a great example and great program to protect the dolphins by providing travelers with great education. And lastly, we need to make sure that the study on bottlenose dolphins should be activated and the study results should be published. And great example, here's great example. In North America, there is a sea called Salish Sea, and this is where many dolphin scholars are gathered to study the species. And the value of conserving dolphins have been strengthened by those scholars. That's all from my side.
Thank you so much. You have presented your critical view as a journalist. Thank you. And as for me, we are behind the schedule. We are not behind the schedule. And let's pass the microphone to Dr. Park. He is an expert on the environmental law in Korea. Would you please begin your remark? Thank you. I teach environmental law at school, but I'm a researcher too. I study the earth law myself, and when it comes to the earth law, we talk about the rights of the nature. So I study the rights of the nature, and I have some remark made on the suggestions made by the presenters. Let me talk about the historic and interesting function of the right. In the Western tradition, the rights are given, or rights are related to the obligation or social obligation and duties, which means that the municipality between the two should be recognized. And the U.S. court deny the legal rights of the animals on that ground. But when we think of the function of the rights based on the ethical theory, what is allowed for humans, what the humans can possess, they are regulated by the rules. So accepting a certain rights have something to do with the decision on the distribution of the freedom and authority. In other words, based on what is decided, we can decide who can do what and who cannot do what. However, this kind of right theory is based on a specific perspective. As said, the current theory is based on the concept that humans are subject and the nature is an object. But the idea or concept of the rights have changed or evolved over time. And we are living in the era of Anthropocene. We are talking about the Earth community, and the health or well-being of the community is closely related to the health of the ecosystem of the Earth. So the community of the Earth is a relational community. To have a very good relational community, we should have a reciprocal relationship between the two. In order to have a reciprocal relationship between the two, we should recognize the basic rights that each entity has. And we recognize the value of the nature, but we can access the issue as a nature, as something that we need to protect. Let's say that we raise children, minority, and they are something that we need to protect, but at the same time, we should recognize its own rights as a humans. We didn't recognize the integrity or basic rights of the children from a long time ago. It has been relatively recent movement. And I believe that the same is applied to the animals too. Animals are not objects or materials. They have life, which means that they should be given or recognized for their rights. So I believe that this is a starting point for us to recognize the basic rights of the nature. Once we recognize it, we need to also recognize the rights of the ecosystem and habitat. And once we recognize that, it can prevent humans further developing the nature. So that's the kind of limitations that we face. The relationship between the humans and nature, we try to change the perspective and the way that we understand the nature. Giving the eco-legal person entity to status to the bottlenose dolphin will be the important starting point. And humanities is just one of the members of the global community. And I believe that what is suggested should be considered as a very serious legal issues that we need to think of for the future. Thank you so much. We have wrapped up all the presentations and discussions. Professor Bosselman, as I said, there are many organizations that started to give legal entities to nature. I just wonder, what do you think? Those people on the floor. We'd like to get your feedback on this idea. So let me know what you think about what is presented here so that we can have lively discussions together. Any questions or comments from the floor?
바다환경 보전협의 회장 한광수입니다.
Good afternoon. I am Han Kwang-soo from the Marine Protection Association. I was impressed by the dolphin-related research results. I used to clean the ocean like once a week, once in several weeks, but today I have to increase the frequency because the waste is growing and the pollution is growing. And as we clean the ocean, we can find a lot of plastic waste and gloves and ropes. All those wastes are identified, and we have the volunteers. Ladies and gentlemen, they all participate in the volunteering work, and we have to get all the waste by ourselves. And Dr. Zhang, you said we have to protect the dolphins, but actually, when we think of those protection, we need to understand that they are injured by those wastes. And you didn't say that they are affected by lack of prey. And there are a lot of nets as well. Ships have their nets spread across oceans to catch fish. And I believe dolphins need prey. So are you talking about we need to take the ocean waste very seriously? That is right. Because of time limitation, let me take your one question only. Thank you. Thank you very much. Any other question from the floor about eco-legal person? Actually, the environmental pollution is something many have already reached the consensus. So is there any question about eco-legal person from the floor? I want to ask a question. Ask Ms. Kim a question. You said we need a lot of creativity and imagination for the eco-legal person. Can I ask you to explain further? Could you answer the question, Ms. Kim? As I told you before, the case I mentioned is very progressive. According to the suggestion, human beings remain as a guardian, but of course, but we want to go beyond that. We need to have a discussion to decide whether to give this eco-legal person status to all dolphins as a whole or the specific species. Bottlenose dolphin, the scope of the eco-legal person should also be decided, and I believe it is a good idea to have all the dolphins together as a broad concept. That's what I mean by creativity. And I believe we might need some rules for the eco-legal person system. We might need some discussions with a lot of people to decide the content of the rules. And when there are conflicts of interest, we also need some guidelines to respond to those conflicts. We might need some details, and we can have an open discussion with the general public. That's what I mean by creativity. Thank you.
답변이 되셨나요?
Does it answer your question? Can I ask a question to you too? The bottlenose dolphins, to which the legal entity was not given, if you do not give the legal person, we find it difficult to protect them. But actually, you told us that you regret what you did, and they should have been better approach. What did you mean by that? There is a law in Korea that can be applied to person. If somebody is in illegal custody, then they can sue. And also other countries, they have a similar kind of law. So Argentina, they kind of bring chimpanzee who are locked in the zoo to the court and raise the issue to the court. We thought that we may do the same, but we do not believe that it can be done in Korea. Back in 2019, there was a hunting lawsuit that we tried to do. And at that time, we faced all the kind of realistic barriers. And animal protection law is the law that we relied on in the end. But it was like trying to break the rock with an egg. But instead of giving up, we should have tried that. That's what we regretted later on. I see. Any other questions or comments from the floor?
네, 주제 발표할 때 클라우스 보셀만
Professor Busselman, Germany, New Zealand, and UN were mentioned by you. So you talked about a lot about UN-led changes. It started from the Rio meeting to protect the earth, but I don't really believe it has had good results. And eco-legal persons and all the similar discussions. Regarding these discussions, I believe you are believing that the UN-led movement is very effective. Can you tell us your support? Why do you believe that way?
If I may answer, thank you for the question. It gives me the opportunity to point out that international environmental law has a number of interesting features in it, in conventions, in treaties, and other international agreements. And what is so important is that we have good texts, but bad implementation and enormous ignorance among states. On the one hand side, they're able to enter ambitious agreements. On the other hand, they are not taken to the task. And the challenge is always to remind governments of the commitments that they have made. Now, a very good example is that the Rio Declaration from 1992, which was one of the founding international agreements defining duties of states to protect the global environment. In Principle 7, there is the obligation, and I quote, that states must cooperate in order to protect and restore the integrity of Earth's ecological system. So the Earth is mentioned there, and more precisely, the integrity of the Earth ecosystem. The notion of ecological integrity is very helpful. We heard a lot about rights of nature and eco-legal persons, and I agree with the concept, of course, ethically and philosophically, but there are certain limitations also that we need to be mindful of. The Western world is very much based on rights, and there's a certain logic to say if you have rights, then you are somebody and you will be noted, and if you don't have rights, then you're nobody. But there is a problem associated with the natural world. On the one hand side, we can envisage animals such as dolphins and other animals that intuitively we would say have rights, just like you and I have the right to exist and to flourish and so forth. But when you look at ecosystems in general or Earth as a whole, you can also say, for example, Earth has a right to exist, but it might just be a bit sort of in need of further defined. The concept of integrity of ecological systems, I think, is very important in law, in international law. In New Zealand, we have a current environmental law reform, and one of the propositions of the new law that will be introduced, at least as a bill, in October next month, will be an overall objective of all New Zealanders to protect the integrity of ecological systems. The beauty of this notion is that it is not anthropocentric, right? We need to be concerned with the functions of ecosystems, the health of ecosystems, independently of whether or not they're useful for humans. This is important. And our whole discussion is, of course, about a shift from the exploitation attitude that humans, in particular Western nations, the big powers and so forth, but basically I would say the European culture. The Asian culture is more interesting, more nuanced. If you think of Taoism, for example, which has a very clear non-anthropocentric harmonic model, or other sort of Buddhism, for example, is of course all about the life in itself, rather than the more Christian Judaistic or Islamic tradition, to assume that God created the world for human beings, and therefore being one of the key factors behind our anthropocentric reductionist concept that has ruled the world, and of course greatly accelerated by capitalism, which has no interest in nature other than considering nature as an assembly of natural resources. So the point being, our whole discussion about eco-legal person is about finding triggering points where we as societies are learning that humans are just part of ecological systems, and we cannot do without nature, obviously. Rather, we need to understand the human-nature relationship as a relationship where humans are part of nature. This is expressed in the Earth Charter. We refer to the community of life there, including humans. And I should also mention, in 2018, some 100 organizations, human rights organizations, indigenous organizations, environmental organizations, adopted the Hague Principles. The Hague Principles were adopted in the Peace Palace in The Hague, next to the International Court of Justice, and various members of the International Court of Justice were also present. And what these Hague Principles do, they define human rights and human responsibilities as expressions of the fact that we as human beings live in a community. We live in societies and in a community where we quite obviously have rights and obligations. And what the Hague Principles also say we are not just humans are not just part of a human community, we are part of the community of life. And thereby we have rights and responsibilities defined in the context of our belonging to the community of all life. And when you read the Hague Principles, they are very, in my sort of interpretation, very sophisticated. They define rights, responsibilities, relationships, and trustee relationships. And maybe a final remark to the notion of trusteeship. Guardianship has been mentioned, and of course, we can also refer to humans as guardians of nature. But in legal terms, and this is stronger than guardianship, a trustee is somebody who acts on behalf and in the interest of somebody who cannot speak for themselves. In a way, parents are trustees or guardians of their minor children, and we are trustees of future generations because they cannot speak for themselves as yet, and the natural world cannot speak for itself, at least not in a language that we understand. So we need, by promoting rights of nature and eco-legal persons, always be mindful that it's us human beings, of course, who interpret those rights. And in doing so, we need to have the best interests of nature in mind, not your human interests, right? So that's why trusteeship and rights of nature belong very closely together. So what I can see in my remarks, I think there are fascinating developments at international level, at UN level. We talk about these things. I just come from various meetings from New York with members of the high-level advisory board on effective multilateralism, it's called. It's a bit of a mouthful, but what this high advisory board has to do is write a report that addresses the key challenges for the future. And one key challenge, obviously, is the global environmental crisis. And in that report, hopefully, we can find strong language that will promote an Earth Trusteeship Council, as mentioned, and will promote the rights of future generations and perhaps even the rights of nature. There's a long process, it doesn't go overnight, but the report, which will be out mid next year, will go to the General Assembly, and the General Assembly will then define the agenda for the Summit for the Future in September 2024. My plea is that this conversation that we are having here today in this panel needs to be broadened, and I really congratulate the organizers that we can talk about eco-legal persons here. But hopefully we have conversations in many other countries, and I know a number of countries where we have this conversation. Of course, laws have been changed, and interestingly, we have it also at UN level. So I'm very excited to hear what has been said here today, and I really look forward to other opportunities where we can perhaps take those ideas any further. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Sorry that we are allowed to complete or finish our session by 6:30, but we're behind schedule. But we will hand over the microphone to Dr. Kim, and we will wrap up after that. Thank you. Thank you so much. First of all, the Earth crisis, in order to respond to that, we need to do many things, and thank you for making a wonderful presentation. Dr. Bosselman's research inspired me. I just wanted to let you know that you are the source of inspiration, and thank you for joining the session. And the bottlenose dolphin case was of a great help to me when you do the research. And I'd like to thank the Green Party of Korea, who promised to enact a law to protect the nature. Thank you for all your support. This is all I have to say today. Thank you so much. This concludes today's session. Thank you.